She waited 7 years for this moment, and when it finally came, everyone wished she hadn't. Mia Sullivan was 16 when her world shattered, standing in the principal's office while three girls smirked behind her, their phones displaying the doctored photos they'd spread across every social media platform in their small Pennsylvania town. The images were fake, cruelly manipulated to destroy her reputation, but the damage was immediate and irreversible. Within hours, Mia became the girl everyone whispered about, the one parents warned their children to avoid, the one who ate lunch alone in bathroom stalls because even the cafeteria felt like a courtroom where she'd already been convicted. The ringleader was Cassandra Pierce, the mayor's daughter, golden-haired and silver-tongued, who orchestrated the entire campaign with surgical precision simply because Mia had been chosen for the lead role in the school musical, a role Cassandra believed was rightfully hers. The other two, Madison and Victoria, were merely puppets dancing on Cassandra's strings, but their cruelty was no less devastating. Mia's parents tried to fight back, but the Pierce family's influence ran deep through every vein of the town, and their lawyer made sure the incident was dismissed as teenage drama, leaving Mia with nothing but scars that wouldn't heal and a future that felt like it had been stolen before it even began. She stopped singing, stopped smiling, stopped believing that good people existed in a world where monsters wore designer clothes and perfect makeup. Her grades, once stellar, plummeted as depression wrapped around her like chains, and by senior year, Mia had become a ghost haunting the hallways of Lincoln High, invisible to everyone except those who occasionally still snickered when she passed. But here's what nobody knew. Mia wasn't broken. She was sharpening herself into a blade, spending every night in her bedroom not crying, but planning, researching, learning everything she could about the three girls who had destroyed her life. She discovered that Cassandra had a secret boyfriend her father knew nothing about, that Madison had been caught shoplifting twice but her records had been mysteriously sealed, and that Victoria had cheated her way through every major exam since freshman year with a sophisticated operation that involved hacked teacher accounts. Mia graduated and left town for college, and everyone assumed she disappeared into obscurity, another casualty of adolescent cruelty, but they couldn't have been more wrong. 7 years after that awful day in the principal's office, Mia returned to her hometown during the weekend of Cassandra's elaborate engagement party, an event the local newspaper had been covering for weeks because Cassandra was marrying into one of the wealthiest families on the East Coast. The party was held at the Pierce estate, a sprawling mansion that looked like it had been plucked from a fairy tale, and nearly 300 guests filled the gardens under strings of lights that turned the night into something magical. Mia wasn't invited, of course, but she didn't need to be there physically because she'd spent months infiltrating every digital aspect of their lives, every account, every secret, every lie they thought was buried deep enough that it would never surface. At exactly 9 p.m., as Cassandra stood on the marble steps preparing to give a speech about love and destiny, the massive screens positioned around the garden that were meant to display romantic photos of the couple suddenly flickered and changed. What appeared instead was a carefully edited video compilation, a timeline of cruelty that began with the original, unaltered photos proving Mia's innocence 7 years ago, followed by text message threads where Cassandra explicitly detailed her plan to destroy Mia's life, laughing about it with Madison and Victoria calling it just for fun, and teaching that nobody takes what's mine. The guests watched in horror as the screens revealed Madison's elaborate shoplifting operation, which had continued into adulthood and now involved stealing from the charity organization where she worked as treasurer, and Victoria's ongoing academic fraud that had gotten her into medical school, where she was currently in her residency, quite literally holding people's lives in her incompetent hands. But Mia had saved the most devastating revelation for Cassandra herself. Footage from a private investigator showing Cassandra in a passionate affair with her fiancé's brother, a relationship that had been ongoing for 8 months, including receipts from hotels, restaurants, and a pregnancy test she'd taken just 2 weeks ago at a clinic 3 towns over, trying to figure out which brother was the father. The garden erupted into chaos, screaming and crying, the fiancé standing frozen like a statue watching his entire world crumble on a screen 15 feet tall, his family surrounding him as Cassandra's parents tried desperately to shut everything down. But couldn't because Mia had locked them out of their own systems. Within an hour, the video had been automatically uploaded to every major social media platform, tagged with the names of everyone involved, sent to the medical board investigating Victoria, the police department reviewing Madison's case, and the local news stations that had spent weeks glorifying Cassandra's perfect engagement. Mia watched it all unfold from her car parked a block away, her laptop glowing in the darkness, and for the first time in 7 years, she smiled. But it wasn't the warm smile she'd had before, it was something cold and sharp, something that had been forged in the fires of humiliation and rage. The consequences were swift and merciless. Cassandra's engagement ended that night with her fiancé, leaving her sobbing in the driveway. Victoria was expelled from her medical residency, pending investigation, and eventually lost her license before ever practicing medicine. Madison faced criminal charges for embezzlement that would send her to prison for 3 years, and Cassandra became the subject of every cruel whisper and sidelong glance in a town that had once worshipped her, exactly the way Mia had been. News outlets picked up the story because of its dramatic nature, and suddenly Mia found herself being called a hero by some and a villain by others, with think pieces debating whether her revenge was justified or if she'd become exactly what she'd hated. But something unexpected happened in the weeks that followed. Mia didn't feel the satisfaction she'd anticipated, the triumph she'd spent 7 years imagining. Instead, she felt hollow. As if she'd poured so much of herself into this vendetta that when it was finally complete, there was nothing left inside her except echoes. She'd achieved her revenge perfectly, destroyed 3 lives with the same precision they'd used on her, but sitting alone in her apartment watching the fallout on her screen, she realized that she'd also destroyed something within herself. The part that could have healed, that could have moved forward, that could have built something beautiful instead of tearing something down. Her old therapist, whom she'd stopped seeing years ago, reached out after seeing the news, and Mia finally agreed to return to counseling, where she spent months unpacking the reality that revenge hadn't given her closure, it had only created new wounds. She learned that the girl who'd been destroyed at 16 and the woman who'd orchestrated this elaborate vengeance were both trapped in the same moment, unable to move forward because they were chained to the past. And that real strength wasn't in matching cruelty with cruelty, but in refusing to let Mia eventually cruelty define who you become, issued a public statement that surprised everyone. She apologized not to Cassandra, Madison, or Victoria, who she still believed deserved consequences for their actions, but to herself and to anyone watching who might think that revenge was a pathway to healing, explaining that she'd spent 7 years of her life in service to hatred and had emerged on the other side not victorious, but empty, realizing too late that the best revenge would have been living well, succeeding despite them, becoming someone so remarkable that their past cruelty would have been nothing more than a footnote in her incredible story. But something unexpected happened in the weeks that followed. Mia didn't feel the satisfaction she'd anticipated, the triumph she'd spent 7 years imagining. Instead, she felt hollow. As if she'd poured so much of herself into this vendetta that when it was finally complete, there was nothing left inside her except echoes. The 3 women whose lives she destroyed faced their own reckonings. Victoria eventually found work as a medical assistant and dedicated herself to actually learning her field properly. Madison served her time and emerged with a genuine desire to make amends. But Cassandra struggled the most, unable to cope with the reversal of fortune, spiraling into depression until she too sought help and began the long process of understanding why she'd been so cruel in the first place. discovering that her need to destroy Mia had come from her own father's impossible standards and her terror of being anything less than perfect. Years later, in an unexpected twist, Mia and Cassandra found themselves in the same therapy group for women dealing with trauma and anger. And though they never became friends, they did reach a moment of understanding, acknowledging that they'd both lost years of their lives to a war that should never have been fought. That revenge and cruelty are two sides of the same poisonous coin, and that the real courage lies not in striking back, but in breaking the cycle entirely. Here's the truth nobody wants to hear. Revenge might feel justified, it might even feel necessary, but it will hollow you out from the inside, leaving you as empty as the people who hurt you. Because when you dedicate your life to someone else's destruction, you give them power over your future just as much as they had over your past. And the only way to truly win is to refuse to play the game at all, to build something so beautiful from your pain that it transforms into wisdom. To become living proof that cruelty doesn't have the final word, because the moment you realize that your happiness is the best revenge, that your peace is the ultimate victory, that's when you finally set yourself free from the prison that someone else built but you've been guarding the door to ever since. And that's when you understand that the strongest thing you can do isn't to make them suffer, it's to refuse to let their actions determine who you become. To choose healing over hatred, growth over grudges, and a future defined not by what was done to you, but by what you chose to do with the person who survived it.